Hello, and thank you for joining us here at English Literature Notes. I'm your host, Emma Hoshek, and today we will be learning about the Pantoum poem. First of all, the definition of a Pantoum poem is that it is a poem with a verse form typically consisting of 3 stanzas. It has a set pattern within the poem of repetitive lines. That set pattern being that the second and fourth line of each verse is repeated as the first and third of the next. Each stanza, therefore, has 4 lines. The pattern changes for the last stanza, however, as the first and third line of the entire poem are the second and fourth of the final stanza. Therefore, the last line is a repeat of the starting line of the poem, bringing the entire thing full circle. An example would be this World War II Pantoum. We can see that the second and fourth lines are repeated as the first and third lines of the second stanza. "They did not die in vain" is repeated, as is "so atrocities of war are never again." This happens again as we see that "wear a poppy each November" and "we must never forget but remember." Those 2 lines are repeated in the third stanza. If you notice, this poem does have 4 stanzas. That's because Pantoums are typically 3 stanzas, but that is not a requirement. The final requirement for a Pantoum, though, is that the first line is repeated as the very last line. "Remember those who died for us, and remember those who died for us." Another example would be the Pantoum Riverside. The second line, "ripples disturb the water," is repeated as the first line of the second stanza, and the fourth line is repeated as the third line of the second stanza. And again we will see that the first line of the poem, "As I walk by the riverside," is repeated as the very last line of the poem. In analyzing a Pantoum, we can see that the repetition allows for lines to be read quite differently with subtle changes in punctuation, and this emphasizes the importance of perspective. For example, the phrase "let's eat grandma" versus "let's eat grandma" shows the difference between asking your grandmother to eat and actually eating the grandmother. Obviously, those 2 things mean. A Pantoum is also filled with many echoes. It causes the reader to take 4 steps forward and 2 steps back. This really slows down their reading and forces them to think much more critically about each line that's being read. Finally, a way to remember the definition for Pantoum is that it sounds like phantom, and a phantom is a ghostly figure. Specifically, the idea of a ghostly figure reappearing later in life is similar to the lines in a Pantoum poem reappearing later in the poem.